The unthinkable things that happened to Catherine of Aragon. How to be dumped, disgrace, and still die a queen. Oh, honey, gather your rosary beads and buckle those bodices, because today we're diving into the absolutely biblical level trauma that befell Catherine of Aragon, a queen who deserved a crown and got a divorce hearing instead. This is the woman who married for duty, stayed for love, and then watched her life unravel because her husband's libido and ego couldn't fit in the same room. This is not your average Tudor tragedy. This is the long, brutal, soul-crushing saga of Catherine, Princess of Spain, Queen of England, and Henry VIII's first and forever problem. Part 1. Spanish royalty or political porn. Let's rewind to 1485. Catherine was born into the most Catholic, most powerful, most extra-royal house in Europe, daughter of Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile, aka the power couple who united Spain and kicked out the Moors. From birth, Catherine wasn't so much a child as she was a diplomatic strategy. At just 3 years old, she was engaged to Prince Arthur of England. Yes, 3. While most toddlers were learning to walk, Catherine was being measured for a wedding gown and shipped off to learn Tudor politics. She finally arrived in England in 1501 and married Arthur at age 15. And just 6 months later, boom, Arthur was dead. Allegedly from sweating sickness, though honestly it might have been the shock of Tudor plumbing. But did they consummate the marriage? That, my loves, became the most litigated sex question in British history. Catherine swore they didn't. Henry VIII later claimed they absolutely did. One of them was lying. The other was trying to survive. Part 2. Henry's wife, England's queen, but only by technicality. After Arthur's death, Catherine spent 7 long, lonely years in England. Poor, isolated, practically ignored. She was stuck in diplomatic limbo while the men around her argued about whether she was worth keeping, like a royal lost property item. Enter Prince Henry, Arthur's younger brother, tall, handsome, athletic, and 100% convinced God had chosen him to marry his brother's widow and fix England's Spanish alliance. In 1509 they tied the knot. Catherine finally became Queen of England, and for a while she slayed. She was intelligent, multilingual, well-loved, pious, fashionable, and even rode into battle in full armour while pregnant. But the honeymoon didn't last. Why? Because the Tudor curse struck again. Part 3. The tragedy of tiny coffins. Catherine's greatest sorrow, and the unthinkable thing that truly broke her, was the loss of child after child. She had 6 pregnancies. One son lived for 52 days. The rest were miscarried, stillborn, or died shortly after birth. In an era obsessed with male heirs, this was not just personal heartbreak, it was political failure. Only one child survived, Princess Mary, and while Catherine adored her daughter, Henry wanted a son, preferably alive, preferably immediately. Instead of offering support, Henry offered Anne Boleyn. Part 4. The Other Woman and the Worst Midlife Crisis in History. Henry became infatuated with Anne Boleyn, a woman who gave him flirtation, headaches, and absolutely no sex, until he put a crown on her head. Now, instead of just cheating, Henry decided to commit to the full-blown nuclear option, annulment. And this is where Catherine's strength becomes legendary. Because instead of slinking away quietly like some unwanted court pet, she stood up in court, looked Henry in the eye, and delivered one of the greatest monologues in history. When you first had me, I take God to be my judge. I was a true maid without touch of man. She told the court, the king, and literally God, that she was his wife, his queen, and not going anywhere. Did it work? Of course not. This was Henry VIII, not a man known for logic or emotional maturity. Part 5. Exile and Humiliation. What followed was nothing short of state-sponsored cruelty. Catherine was banished from court. Her jewels were taken, her royal title stripped. her servants removed. She wasn't even allowed to see her daughter Mary. Letters between them were censored or stolen. It was psychological torture, dressed up as politics. She was moved from castle to castle like some unwanted house guest, eventually ending up at Kimbleton Castle, damp, cold, and increasingly ill. Anne Boleyn strutted around in her old gowns. Henry declared himself head of the church. Catherine? She refused to acknowledge the divorce, the new queen, or the new religion. To her dying breath she signed her letters, Catherine the Queen. Part 6. Death of a Queen, and a saint in everything but name. On January 7th, 1536, Catherine of Aragon died, likely from cancer or heart failure, but some whispered that she was poisoned. Henry didn't attend the funeral. Mary wasn't allowed to go. Catherine was buried as a dowager princess, not a queen, in a nun's habit, in Peterborough Cathedral. Henry was too busy jousting and celebrating Anne's latest pregnancy. Spoiler, that didn't end well either. But here's the twist. England never stopped loving her. Even Protestant chroniclers called her noble, the queen who wouldn't be erased. Catherine of Aragon wasn't just the first wife. She was the first line of resistance to Henry's spiral into tyranny. She was a woman who endured unthinkable loss, relentless cruelty, and public humiliation, and never stopped believing in her truth. She died alone, but she died a queen. And if that's not power, I don't know what is. The unspeakable things that happened to Anne Boleyn. How to lose a husband and your head in 100 days. Welcome back, my scandal-thirsty Tudor-philes. Today we're unpacking the spectacular crash and burn story of Anne Boleyn, aka the second wife who learned that being irresistible to Henry VIII is actually a medical condition with a 100% fatality rate. This is not your average fall from grace. This is betrayal, backstabbing, sexual politics, and Tudor misogyny at its finest. Grab your French hoods and prepare for impact. Anne Boleyn, the original it girl. Anne Boleyn rolled into Henry's court like she owned the place. Sharp wit, killer fashion, an accent that screamed continental sophistication. She wasn't your typical docile English rose. She was spicy, flirty, clever, and most importantly, she said no. Henry, of course, immediately decided she was the one. Because nothing excites a narcissist more than a woman who won't sleep with him right away. The 7-year chase. Henry spent 7 years trying to get Anne into bed and into marriage. He wrote love letters. He wrote poetry. He even ghosted the Pope, broke from the Catholic Church, and created his own personal religious franchise, the Church of England. Basically, if the Pope won't annul my first marriage, I'll simply invent divorce. Problem solved. Anne finally became queen in 1533, heavily pregnant with their first child. The pressure, immaculate. The expectations, impossible. The real unspeakable thing, giving birth to a girl. Anne's first big unspeakable crime, delivering Elizabeth, a girl. Henry was, let's say, underwhelmed. His one job for Anne was simple: produce a penis with a heartbeat. Anne's failure to produce a spare XY chromosome began the slow unravelling of her royal fairy tale. The miscarriages, the stress, the backstabbing. Anne suffered multiple miscarriages, each one making Henry's side-eye more aggressive. Meanwhile, her enemies at court, and boy, did she have a collection, whispered sweet little rumours into Henry's ears. She's a witch, she bewitched you, she's having affairs with her brother, with half the court, maybe even with a horse. Okay, not the horse, but honestly, the accusations got that unhinged. The plot thickens. Thomas Cromwell enters the chat. Cromwell, Henry's right-hand fixer, decided Anne was politically inconvenient, so he orchestrated one of the most outrageous smear campaigns in royal history. He rounded up court musicians, courtiers, poets. Verdict: guilty. Sentence: off with her head. The execution: French chic, English brutality. On May 19th, 1536, Anne was executed at the Tower of London. Because Henry was feeling generous, read image management, he ordered a French swordsman instead of the traditional English axe. Faster, cleaner, more photogenic. Anne arrived, cool, calm, and fashionably fatal. I die the king's true wife. And then, swoosh. Anne Boleyn went from queen to legend in one stroke. Her legacy, the ghost that never left. Anne Boleyn may have died, but she left behind Queen Elizabeth I, kind of a big deal, a religious revolution, and one of the most famous necklines in history. To this day, people claim to see her ghost at the tower, wandering around, looking for her missing head. Honestly, fair. So if you think your toxic ex was bad, just remember, at least he didn't invent felony incest charges to get out of brunch with your family. Anne Boleyn, the queen who played the game and got played harder. If you loved this royal roller coaster of gaslighting, betrayal, and sharp objects, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your fellow messy history addicts. And remember, in Tudor England, being the one meant you were one bad mood away from public execution. The unthinkable things done to Jane Seymour, or how to die quietly and still get dragged by history. Buckle in, because we are about to get scandalous, sassy, extra long, and very extra. Welcome to the absolutely bonkers Tudor-level mess that was Jane Seymour's short but drama-packed reign as Queen of England. Setting the scene, wife number 3, the quiet middle sister of doom. Picture it. England, 1536. Henry VIII has just yeeted Anne Boleyn out of existence, as in off with her head, and is already shopping for wife number 3 before Anne's poor little head has even cooled. Enter Jane Seymour. Jane wasn't like wife number 1, Catherine of Aragon, royal and spicy, or wife number 2, Anne Boleyn, scandalous and sharp-tongued. No. Jane was presented as the anti-Anne, quiet, obedient, pious, and, let's be honest, strategically blonde, because nothing says safe rebound for a serial wife collector like a woman who won't argue while you play Henry VIII Extreme Patriarchy Edition. The courtship, an emotional crime scene. Was Jane really in love with Henry? Absolutely not. Did she have a choice? Also no. Jane was practically plucked from the Royal Hunger Games lineup. She had been lady-in-waiting to Queen Catherine, then Anne, and she knew better than to refuse the king's attention. Because in Tudor England, I'm flattered, but I'm seeing someone, often translated to, cool, let's schedule your execution for next Tuesday. Meanwhile, Henry was desperate for a male heir, and Jane's sweet smile may as well have read, womb available for hire. The wedding whiplash. How fast was this marriage? Anne Boleyn was executed May 19th. Henry and Jane betrothed May 20th. Married May 30th. That's a 10-day turnaround, faster than Amazon Prime. No cooling off period, just straight from scaffold to altar. You think Henry was grieving? Honey, Henry wasn't even done polishing off the roast chicken from Anne's execution banquet. The Royal Baby Factory, mission accomplished. Jane's entire job? Crank out a son, and she delivered. Literally, in 1537, after a pregnancy that had Henry skipping around Hampton Court like a TikTok teenager, Jane gave birth to Edward VI, the long-awaited male heir, the Tudor golden child, and, spoiler alert, tragically short-lived king. But now, the unthinkable things really begin. The birth. Medieval medical mayhem. Giving birth in Tudor England was basically extreme sports. No anaesthesia, no C-section, no knowledge of germs, zero privacy, midwives, physicians, ladies-in-waiting, practically half of Hampton Court watching. Jane laboured for 48 hours of Tudor agony, while everyone whispered and hoped she wouldn't die before the baby arrived. When Edward was finally born, everyone cheered. Henry declared victory. England rejoiced. Except Jane. Because Jane was now in medical hell. Jane developed what we now suspect was puerperal fever, sepsis, caused by unwashed hands, unclean instruments, and zero understanding of bacteria. Imagine, you've just delivered the heir to the throne, and your reward? A raging infection because nobody thought to wash their filthy hands. For 10 days Jane deteriorated, while Henry celebrated with banquets and masks. Yes, Henry threw parties, while his wife lay dying upstairs. Because nothing says thank you for the son like drunken revelry while your spouse fades away in dirty linen. By October 24th, 1537, less than 2 weeks after Edward's birth, Jane was dead. Cause of death? Infection. Official cause? Tudor medicine's finest, shrug. Henry naturally declared himself the world's most devastated widower, conveniently ignoring that his court's hygiene likely signed her death warrant. You'd think Jane would finally get some peace in death. Ha, no. 1. The perfect wife PR campaign. Henry practically canonized Jane as the ideal wife, the quiet one, the one who gave him a son, didn't talk back, conveniently died before causing trouble. Anne Boleyn? Adulterous whore. Catherine of Aragon? Stubborn nuisance. Jane Seymour? Saintly angel. Henry's PR machine went into overdrive. Jane became the poster girl of Tudor propaganda. 2. The wax corpse debacle. Her embalming? The usual Tudor catastrophe. Wrapped, stuffed and coated in spices like a roast ham. A wax effigy made for the funeral decked out in jewels. The wax face? Melted during the procession. Because of course they hadn't mastered temperature control. Even her effigy couldn't catch a break. 3. The burial next to Henry. Henry ensured Jane got the ultimate honour. Burial beside him at St. George's Chapel, his one true wife. Of course, he chose that, not her. In death, Jane was eternally shackled to the man, who likely played a solid role in her early demise. The unthinkable things that happened to Anne of Cleves, from royal rebound to Tudor winner, divorce never looked so good. Oh, my loves, you think being dumped by text is bad? Try being dumped by royal decree because the king thought your face wasn't giving enough sparkle. Today, we're diving into the criminally underrated, scandalously misunderstood, and iconically resilient life of Anne of Cleves, wife number 4 of Henry VIII, aka the wife who got away with her head, her house, her jewels, her pension, and her peace. This is not the story of a tragic queen, it's the story of a Tudor divorcee who outplayed the entire court and walked away the true winner of the Henry VIII Hunger Games. Part 1. Tinder for Tudors, a portrait catfish. Let's set the stage. It's the late 1530s. Henry VIII has just had Anne Boleyn executed, James Seymour is dead from childbirth, and he's spent a minute being awkward with his advisors and crying over his leg ulcer. But England needs alliances. So enter Anne of Cleves, a German princess from the Duchy of Cleves. No scandal, no baggage, no enemies, just the Protestant realpolitik wife that England needed. Henry sent Hans Holbein, court painter and king of Tudor Instagram filters, to paint her portrait. The result? A total glow-up. Henry saw the painting and said, "Yes, please." But then came the real-life meet-up, and sweet Henry was not impressed. She is nothing so fair as she hath been reported, aka, bro, she's mid. Part 2. The cringiest wedding night in history. Henry married Anne in January 1540, and by that evening he was already muttering insults under his breath. The man who had once jousted for love now couldn't even be bothered to kiss his new bride properly. Their wedding night? An absolute disaster. Henry allegedly came out of the bedroom claiming she had evil smells, sagging breasts, and that he was not stirred. Meanwhile, Anne, probably just trying to survive the vibe shift, had no idea anything was wrong. She kept smiling, playing cards, petting his dogs, and being the perfect queen, while Henry was literally asking lawyers how fast he could escape the marriage. Part 3. Divorce. Tudor style, but make it rich. By July 1540, the marriage was over. That's right, 6 months and the king was already done. But here's where Anne flips the script. When told the marriage would be annulled, Anne didn't scream, she didn't cry, she didn't even argue. She just said, "Oh, cool. Do I get to keep the house?" And baby did she. Anne walked away with a lavish settlement, several estates, including Hever Castle, Anne Boleyn's old haunt, which is so petty of Henry, an annual pension bigger than most kingdoms' military budgets, and the title of Part 4. Court Queen without the stress. After the annulment, Anne thrived. She stayed in England, partied at court, and outlived Henry, Catherine Howard, Catherine Parr, and most of the men involved in her downfall. She got along fabulously with Mary and Elizabeth, was treated with respect, and even got invited to palace events. Think of her as that cool single aunt who shows up to Christmas in a velvet cloak and no responsibilities. Meanwhile, Henry went on to marry Catherine Howard, a literal teenager, and we all know how that ended. Spoiler, decapitation. Anne, on the other hand, was alive, rich, and unbothered. Part 5. Death without drama. Anne died in 1557 at the age of 41. Not bad at all for a Tudor woman, let alone one who had stood next to Henry VIII. She was buried in Westminster Abbey, the only one of Henry's wives to be buried there, not as a queen, but still honoured, still respected. She never remarried, never caused scandal, never complained publicly. But quietly, behind the scenes, she won. Because let's be honest, the others got titles and tragedy. Anne got freedom and financial security. And in Tudor terms, that's basically a fairy tale ending. The queen who played the long game. Anne of Cleves wasn't boring. She was strategic. She read the room, saw the writing on the royal wall, and said, "You know what? I'll take the castles, the dresses, and the pension. Keep the king." She never had to fight for her life in court. She never had to dodge accusations, rumours, or scaffold appointments. And best of all, she never had to sleep with Henry again. So next time someone calls her the ugly wife, remember, she's the only one who walked away smiling. The unthinkable things that happened to Catherine Howard, teenage bride, Tudor roadkill, and Henry's midlife crisis mistake. Oh, sweet summer child, you think you've made bad relationship decisions? Wait until you hear about Catherine Howard. the teenage queen who danced straight into the jaws of Henry VIII's midlife meltdown and paid for it with her head. This, my darlings, is not just a royal tragedy. It's the ultimate tale of too young, too pretty, and way too married to a man who smelled like gout and regret. Buckle up for betrayal, bedroom gossip, and the most chilling walk down a corridor in Tudor history. Part 1. Born to be a side note. Catherine Howard was born around 1523. Yes, born while Catherine of Aragon was still queen, and just a few years after Anne Boleyn made head-turning the national sport. So, naturally, poor Catherine was doomed to get dragged into all that royal baggage like a Tudor handbag. She was the 5th wife of Henry VIII, yes, number 5. By the time Henry got to her, he was older, grumpier, widening like a collapsed soufflé, and increasingly convinced God owed him a sexy, fertile wife with no opinions. Catherine, she was maybe 16, and Henry, 50 and full of fantasies. Part 2. The Rose Without a Thorn. Henry saw Catherine dancing at court and declared her his rose without a thorn, which is adorable if you ignore the fact that roses still get trampled and thorns were probably the only thing that could have saved her. She was young, lively, flirtatious, and most importantly, not Anne of Cleves. Henry's previous wife had been so aggressively unsexy to him that marrying Catherine must have felt like a second puberty. So, in 1540 they got married. Catherine Howard became Queen of England, and instantly one of the most underqualified, overwhelmed, and overexposed teens in royal history. Part 3. The Court of Whispers and Wardrobes. Catherine liked pretty things, gowns, jewels, compliments, attention. Honestly, same. But she also liked a little something else. Namely, Thomas Culpeper, a courtier with cheekbones and charm to spare. And this is where it all starts unravelling like Henry's waistband at a feast. Before her marriage, Catherine had already had romantic entanglements, plural. First with Henry Manox, her music teacher, a man who absolutely gave ick even by Tudor standards. Then with Francis Derham, with whom she may or may not have considered herself pre-contractually hitched, which in Tudor legal speak basically counted as a secret engagement. And after marriage, she allegedly resumed Part 4. Enter Archbishop Buzzkill. Here comes Archbishop Cranmer with his holy receipts. In 1541, rumours began swirling faster than a Tudor ruff in the wind. Whispers of lovers, letters and stolen kisses reached Henry's ear, and instead of, say, talking it out like emotionally mature adults, lol never, Henry froze. He didn't scream, he didn't yell, he went dead silent, which, if you're a Tudor queen, is far more terrifying than any royal tantrum. Part 5. The Interrogation Games. The fallout was brutal. Her ladies-in-waiting were dragged in for questioning. Interrogations turned into confessions. Confessions turned into accusations. Accusations turned into death warrants. Francis Derham, tortured and hung, drawn and quartered. Classic Henry. Thomas Culpeper, beheaded, but still got off light considering the vibes. And Catherine, she was locked in her rooms, alone, terrified, and likely realising that being queen was less happily ever after and more death trap in pearls. She wrote Henry a letter, a desperate plea of love, innocence, and please don't kill me. He didn't answer. Part 6. The Screaming Corridor. In February 1542, Catherine was moved to the Tower of London. Legend has it, and let's be real, we love a good Tudor legend, that she escaped her guards and ran screaming down the corridor, begging for Henry's mercy. Whether it happened or not, the image is unforgettable. A teenage girl, betrayed and condemned, sprinting through stone halls trying to reach the man who had once called her his rose without a thorn. It's giving ghost story, and that's exactly what it became. People say her spirit still runs that corridor, screaming. Part 7. Off with her head. February 13, 1542. Catherine Howard was beheaded on Tower Green. She was barely 19 years old. Her final words, "I die a queen, but I would rather die the wife of Thomas Culpeper." Oof, that's a mic drop in Tudor. She was buried near Anne Boleyn, her cousin, ironically, who'd also married Henry, also lost her head, and also learned too late that being queen was not a safety net. The girl who was never safe. Catherine Howard didn't stand a chance. She was a pawn in court games, a teenager in over her head, and a scapegoat for a king who refused to look in the mirror. She was married to power, surrounded by predators, and executed not because she was wicked, but because she was young, naive, and unforgivable in a world run by insecure men. So if you ever feel like life's unfair, just remember Catherine Howard, Queen of England, child bride, Tudor tragedy, and the girl who danced too close to the fire. Unthinkable things that happened to Catherine Parr. Nurse, queen, widow, and the one who actually survived Henry VIII. Oh, honey, if you think marrying Henry VIII was a death sentence, you're not wrong. But one woman actually survived it. Enter Catherine Parr. Not the sex symbol, not the tragic teen, not the beheaded scandal. No, Catherine was the sixth and final wife, the one who played chess while everyone else was still figuring out checkers. She was brilliant, bookish, brave, and somehow managed to outwit a man who literally executed half his wives. But don't get too comfortable, because surviving Henry was just the start of her trauma. Let's talk about Catherine Parr. Queen, author, nurse, and the one whose happily ever after ended with betrayal, heartbreak, and one final unthinkable twist. Part 1. Before the crown and before the drama. Catherine wasn't born to be queen. She was born to be clever. Daughter of Sir Thomas Parr and Maud Green, she was educated, poised, and raised with more books than ball gowns. Unlike most Tudor girls, Catherine could read Latin and debate theology before she could legally drink wine. Iconic. And by the time she caught Henry's eye, she was already a two-time widow, which in Tudor England made her mature, aka about 30, and depressingly available. She didn't want to marry Henry. She was in love with Thomas Seymour, the hot, reckless brother of Jane Seymour. But when the King of England slides a ring across the table, you don't exactly swipe left. So, in 1543, Catherine Parr became wife number 6. Cue the danger music. Part 2. Queen, caretaker, and crisis manager. Catherine wasn't just a wife. She was a full-time nurse, therapist, tutor, and HR manager to a monarch in physical and emotional decline. Henry had a festering leg ulcer, a short temper, a waistline expanding faster than the national debt, and a tendency to execute people who made him feel insecure. And yet, Catherine handled it. She dressed his wounds, read him Bible verses, and kept him calm while the court descended into chaos. She also became a stepmother to 3 royal children, Mary, Elizabeth, and Edward, and unlike most stepmothers in history, they actually liked her. Especially Elizabeth, who finally had a queen who valued intelligence, not just appearances. But don't be fooled. It wasn't all warm firesides and moral support. The danger was still very real. Part 3. Catherine versus the Heresy Squad. Catherine Parr had a passion for religion, specifically the Protestant side of things, and this made her a walking, talking heresy risk. She published 2 books, one while queen, including Lamentation of a Sinner, which was basically how to be a Reformation girl boss in a Catholic world. This made her a target.
Yes,
The same man she was spoon-feeding broth to while changing his bandages was about to burn her at the stake. But Catherine was smarter than all of them. She played dumb. She cried. She told Henry she was just a simple woman discussing religion to distract him from his pain. She basically gaslit the king into thinking she was harmless, and he bought it. The arrest was cancelled, and when the Lord Chancellor showed up the next day with armed guards, Henry shouted him out of the room. Part 4. Widow. Again. And freedom. Briefly. Henry VIII died in 1547, shocking no one. Catherine was now 35, a 4-time widow, a survivor of royal marriage, and finally free. And she wasted no time. She married Thomas Seymour, the bad boy she'd loved before Henry, and this time she did it on her own terms. No royal permission, no council input, just a thank you next to the patriarchy. But oh dear, this is where the happiness sours. Part 5. The final betrayal. Catherine finally got what she'd always wanted. A passionate marriage, a home of her own, and then, at long last, a baby. Yes, after a lifetime of stepmothering and loss, she gave birth to a daughter, Mary Seymour, in 1548. But her happiness was short-lived. Catherine died days later, likely from childbed fever, an infection that took more women than war ever could. She was 36 years old. And Thomas Seymour turned out to be a walking disaster. He flirted with the teenage Princess Elizabeth while Catherine was still alive. Historians have debated just how far it went, but whether creepy or criminal, it was disgusting. After Catherine's death, Seymour tried to seize power by marrying Elizabeth and manipulating young Edward VI. He ended up executed for treason a year later. Their daughter Mary disappeared from the historical record, likely died young. Another unmarked casualty of Tudor drama. The survivor who deserved better. Catherine Parr was the only wife who outlived Henry, but that doesn't mean she got a happy ending. She was intelligent, resilient, politically savvy, and emotionally exhausted by the time freedom finally arrived. She saved Elizabeth, protected Mary, helped Edward, defied arrest, wrote best-selling religious texts, and kept her head while others literally lost theirs. And what did she get in return? One more toxic man, one more betrayal, and one final grave.